Observations about My Critical Reading by Sullivan. The reader response theory is the relationship between the reader and the text. Every single reader brings a different perspective to a text, and the reader response theory recognizes the importance of this. Different perspectives allow for different understandings in the meaning of each piece. The reader response theory acknowledges how a reader's life will impact their personal view of the text. Because I was raised Catholic, while reading the poem I Have a Rendezvous with Death, I made a connection with the acceptance of God's will. The poem illustrates the nobility that comes with putting one's own life at risk in the name of their country. Seeger is not afraid of dying, rather he welcomes it. It is displayed through the use of rhetoric devices. A biblical allusion in the second stanza is an example of this. It may be he shall take my hand and lead me into his dark land and close my eyes and quench my breath. It may be I shall pass him still. These lines translate to the acceptance of God's will. Seeger is fighting for his country, and if he must die, God will take him peacefully. When I have approached poetry in the past, I tend to look at the poem as a whole, though this time around, I was a close textual reader. The strategy I utilized here was to notice imagery. Imagery appeals to the five senses, describing scenes, characters, or other specific details. This use of imagery contributes to the mood and tone of the poem. It can also explain the traits of a character. The last line in the first stanza, when spring brings back blue days and fair, uses imagery to create a light and positive tone. This positive tone exemplifies the soldier's bravery and willingness to die for his country in the poem I Have a Rendezvous with Death. The final stanza mentions, pillowed in silk and scented down, where love throbs out in blissful sheep, pulse nigh to pulse and breath to breath, where hushed awakenings are dear, but I've a rendezvous with death. This section of the poem recognizes that it may be better to die in one's sleep around family and loved ones, though the soldier recognizes that he is not meant to have a peaceful death. He is meant to sacrifice his life for his country. The soldier believes that dying for his country is the noblest honor. My favorite use of technology in this class was the use of comments and annotations for analyzing poems. Normally, I despise poetry, though this changed the way I approach it now. Using the annotations made the poem much less overwhelming. It forced me to closely examine each line and each word. Since I was now examining each line and each word, comprehending the poem became tremendously more manageable. Without this digital tool, I would have had a different understanding of A.E. Housman's to an athlete dying young. The use of annotations made me realize the importance of Housman's word choice in the last line of the second stanza. He chooses the word stiller to represent a graveyard or the athlete's final resting place. This course allowed for a lot of overlap with many of my other courses here at Sacred Heart. Though it was my freshman seminar, Coming of Age, U.S. Film and Fiction, and the various texts we studied that I found the most correlation. All of the text was centered around the Bildungsroman genre. Bildungsroman focuses on the intellectual and psychological growth of the main character from childhood into adulthood. I found this genre fit well with the first piece we read, The Things They Carried, by Tim O'Brien. The main character, Lieutenant Jimmy Cross, along with the rest of the men serving in the Vietnam War, were extremely young. These young men had their everyday lives interrupted and were thrown into battle. War is confusing for everyone, let alone someone still growing and maturing. This internal struggle is explored in O'Brien's novel on page 14. They carried the common secret of cowardice barely restrained, the instinct to run or freeze or hide, and in many respects this was the heaviest burden of them all, for it could never be put down. It required perfect balance and perfect posture. The men's lives were dependent on their ability to constantly know how to respond to any given situation. They were scared, terrified of having their lives constantly on the line. The soldiers had to learn how to balance their fear in order to keep on surviving each day. One major challenge I overcame this semester was my ability to analyze poetry. When I read on the syllabus that we would be having a poetry unit, I almost winced in pain. In high school, there was nothing more I dreaded than poetry. Though this unit of poetry was unlike any study of poetry I have ever done. When I have approached poetry in the past, I used to look at the poem as a whole. This time around, I was a close textual reader. I believe this was due to the use of close reading and annotating. The last line in the stanza, "When spring comes back, blue days and fair," uses imagery to create light and positive tone at the start of the poem that contradicts the overall ominous message of the poem. My most memorable experience during this class was the short story unit. I loved having the roundtable discussions each week, which allowed for everyone to voice their opinions about the stories. I particularly loved when the class was discussing the short story Two Kinds by Amy Tan. The story focused on a mother-daughter relationship. I love hearing how everyone's own personal childhoods impacted the way they viewed the story. Even though we all read the same text, the entire class had a completely different understanding of it. I then began to realize how powerful the reader is to the reading. I was able to see firsthand how my classmates' lives impacted their perceptions of the mother and her relationship with her daughter. My aha moment during the semester came while reading Sophocles' Greek tragedy, Antigone. When I first read Antigone in my senior year of high school, I did not enjoy it one bit. So, needless to say, I was not thrilled to be reading it again. Though it was during a class discussion about the complexity of the character Creon that I began to recognize how I had grown as a critical reader throughout the semester. Originally, I had thought of Creon as a completely evil figure, just a selfish man who puts his own wants and needs before anyone else. But as we were discussing Creon's role as the leader in Thebes, it became clear that he is more multifaceted than I originally thought. Throughout lines 186 to 194, Creon makes a statement: "I would never be silent if I saw madness creeping among the citizens in peace of salvation, nor would I ever consider an enemy of my country a friend of myself, recognizing this, that my country is safety itself, and only when she is upright can our sailing find friends. With laws like these, I will make this city grow." Creon is exemplifying his great leadership skills in this proclamation. Though Creon is harsh to forbid Polynices from a proper burial, there is a reason behind this decision. Though Creon is harsh to forbid Polynices from a proper burial, he has a reason behind this decision. Creon is protecting Thebes. He is afraid that without this ruling, more chaos may occur. Creon truly cares for his people and the state, which is the reason behind this law.